Good morning. Can everybody hear me? This is Mike Mengden, and this morning we're going to talk about residential leasing top 10 do's and don'ts. We will be recording this webinar. All of the attendees will receive the slides in a couple of days. We're going to hold the questions till the end. You can ask questions on your screen, and we will do all those at the end of the presentation. Y'all ready? Let's go. Okay, first thing I want to do with you guys is I want to change. Okay, we need to move. How come we're not moving? Okay, technical difficulties. There we go. Okay, first thing we want to do, that says if I want to leave, is let's talk about your mindset on leasing. Leasing is completely different from sales. So what I want you to do is think about when you went to real estate school and remember how much leasing education you received. Most of you, in fact, probably 99.9% of you will say, I got nothing. And then remember when you took your real estate test, how many questions had to do about leasing. And again, almost all of you, in fact, unless there was something weird that I missed in the last 30 years, are going to say nothing. There was nothing in there about leasing, but a lot of you guys end up doing it, and you end up doing it a lot of times because you're trying to protect that listing for down the road so you can sell that property. So I get that part. But you don't get any education in it. So I need to change your mindset. When you do a sale, and I've done tons of sales, so I understand the process, so I don't want you to think that I'm belittling this. When you are doing a sale, it is a transaction. You go out and you meet your client and you walk around the house and you figure out what you're going to do and get it listed, and then you start showing it, and hopefully very soon you get a contract and you get your you get it accepted, you do all your negotiations, and you get to the title company, and then you have a title company that is helping you, and you have a mortgage company that's assisting you, and you have a title company attorney that's doing all the title checks and all that stuff, and you've got an appraiser, and you've got a tax service, and you've got a surveyor, and you've got an inspector, and you've got all of these people that help you get to that end result. And then you go to the title company on that day, and it's a glorious day, and everybody gets a check or brings a check and gets keys, and everybody shakes hands, and everybody goes their own way, and you're done. Lease is completely different. Nobody helps you. And even though it technically is a transaction when you're the agent, whether you're helping the landlord side or the tenant side, you are basically performing marriage for one landlord and one tenant for typically the next year. And anything that goes wrong is, of course, your fault, whether it is or not. They're going, the tenant's going to blame you, the landlord's going to blame you, the landlord's going to call you 6 months into it to tell you what to do with this tenant that's breaking the lease. The tenant is going to do the same thing with their agent because the landlord's a slumlord and you need to help them do this. And none of this stuff is true. Once you sign the lease, you're done, but they're not going to let you out. So you need to make sure that you are comfortable, whether whoever side you're working on, that you are comfortable working with that seller or that tenant. Because whether you like it or not, they're going to call you. I can't tell you how many hundreds and hundreds of calls I've gotten over the years from agents that are calling for advice, and the first thing they say is, well, my tenant that I moved in 3 months ago called me and I need to help them. It's going to happen. Be prepared for it. Legally, you're done once the lease is signed, but that doesn't mean they're not going to do something. So here's the second thing that you got to run into. There are 3 things that people break all the time. Number 1, IABS. It is a requirement at your first substance conversation that you give the tenant or the landlord an IABS. It is amazing how many people on the leasing side said, nah, it's only a lease, I don't need to worry about that. Buyer reps, when you are doing I'm assuming most of you go get a buyer-tenant rep agreement signed when you're doing a sale. It is amazing how many people will go show a lease house to somebody and never get a buyer-tenant rep agreement signed. Remember, if you do not have a buyer-tenant rep agreement signed, who do you work for? You have all of a sudden become a sub-agent. You are no longer, you're not a tenant rep, you're a sub-agent. So you have to be careful and make sure that you sign that buyer-tenant rep, because guess who thinks you work for them? The tenant does. And there are lots of complaints both both at TAR, Texas Realtor, and at TREC, because tenants think they were misrepresented because they thought that agent worked for them. If you don't have a buyer rep, you are automatically assumed to work for the landlord. I know you can set agency in verbally, but you got to be able to prove it, and you can't prove it verbally. So besides, it's a violation of code of ethics if you don't get it in writing. So please, 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 if you're going to just show one house for one afternoon, get a buyer-tenant rep agreement signed so that you can protect yourself. Other big problem that we have is intermediary. People don't understand intermediary, and they think, again, it's a lease, so I don't have to work at it. I don't have to think about it. If you are showing your company's listings, whether it's your listing or some other agent's listing, and you show a prospective tenant, and you don't have a buyer rep agreement with that tenant, that's fine, because you are showing a customer your company's listings. Be careful, because when you do have a buyer-tenant rep agreement, now you must go through the intermediary process if you're showing a listing that's with your company. So be aware of that. A lot of problems with that at TREC. So these are things that a lot of people just think you don't have to do because it's a lease. And it's not true. You have the same steps, the same hoops you have to jump through on a lease than you do on a sale. Okay, number 2, get permission. Does your broker allow leasing or property management? A lot of you guys end up in property management accidentally. I have never met a person that went into property management on purpose, and I've been doing this a long time. So there's no education for that. Everybody stumbles into it. Meet a room full of property managers and ask them, how many of you went to school to become a property manager? And there's no hands up. We all are nice people, and we get stuck into it. So make sure your broker allows it. Big complaints at TREC when you do things against what your broker tells you to. E&O, does your E&O cover it? Their E&O policies change every year. What they cover and what they don't cover happens all the time. So make sure that your E&O coverage covers leasing and accidental property management if you do that, but don't do that. Third, competence. According to our code of ethics and according to the stuff that TREC is working on right now, you must be competent in what you're doing. If you've never leased a property before, make sure you know what you're doing before you do that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, pay attention to TREC. TREC is usually a very, very good barometer on what people are doing and what they're not doing correctly. So here's the major complaints to TREC. It's stayed fairly steady over the last few years. I didn't put percentages on there because it varies a little bit year to year, but the main stuff still applies. First one, okay, if it will, come on. Leasing and property management misappropriation, commingling, failure to properly account for money. If you're doing leasing, should you be taking money and depositing into your business account at your office? No. Those monies go to the landlord. That's for them to handle and keep the deposit. If you're having the first month's rent made out to the listing broker, then that goes into your operating account because that's a commission. So that's a different issue. But watch what you do with the money. Always a big problem. Negligence, false promises, and referrals. This is a big problem on my side, being a landlord representative in the property management industry, is agents going out and say, oh, that's okay, that's fine, they'll take care of that, they'll paint that, they'll do this, they'll do that, and your house will be perfect when you move in. Well, we put it on the market in that condition because that's what the landlord said. So be careful of what you promise. If you want something done, make sure that you put it on the application. There is a space now right up at the top of the application where you can put what repairs you want done, what updates you want, cleanings, carpets, whatever you want to have happen. Make sure that you put that stuff up there up front so that that doesn't have a problem for the other agents. Third one, broker supervision. Again, we're talking about TREC complaints. Broker's failure to supervise sponsored salespersons. Your broker is responsible for everything you do. So if you go to a broker that doesn't have a big training department or doesn't watch you like some other brokers do, be careful. The broker is responsible. So make sure. Sales, which we don't need to talk about really, but that's the fourth one at TREC. And then the fifth one is this intermediary and IABS. Big deal. See a lot of complaints at TREC about people failing to get the IABS. Make sure everybody knows who you work for. You can say something like, hey, let's go out and we'll find you this house. Well, that just maybe told that tenant that you work for them. So make sure, absolutely, no question, who you work for and who is your customer and who is your duties. So make sure you cover that. That's a big one. Number 4, use your realtor resources. We have a ton of resources in Texas. For those of you that, excuse me, that don't travel outside the state very often and look at other realtor associations, you are blessed to be in Texas. We have a phenomenal group at HAR, and we have a phenomenal group at Texas Realtors. Both of these associations do phenomenal work on the leasing and management side. Most other states don't have anything even remotely connected to this. We have a TAR hotline you can call that is staffed by TAR attorneys. This is not some office clerical person that's taking your questions. These are attorneys. It's in their job description. So many hours a week, they are manning those phones to answer your questions. I have never heard of anybody that's gotten bad advice. I've never heard of anybody that said, oh my God, I had to wait for a week to get a call back. They're usually very prompt, and they will take your calls. Use that. You have a forms library at TAR. There's 150 forms in the library. 50 of them are leasing and property management forms. We have a phenomenal lease. We have lease extensions. We have notice to vacates. We've got 3-day notices. We've got the lead addendum. We have all kinds of stuff to do with various things that are going to happen in a lease. All of the addendums that we have, talking about ESAs, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or landlord's rules, just all kinds of stuff, tenant selection criteria, which we'll talk about in a minute. All of these things are very, very good for you to be able to use in your business. Now, where do these forms come from? These forms come from committees that Texas Realtors set up decades ago to draft these forms. It is a group of brokers, which change from time to time, and staff attorneys at Texas Realtors, which also changes from time to time. And usually every couple of years we get together, like right now, right after the legislature's done, and we update the forms. They are Texas Realtors forms, which means they are voluntary. They are not like TREC forms, which are promulgated. The TREC forms you must use in a transaction. The Texas Realtor forms are for your voluntary use by members of Texas Realtors. My advice, use the form. It has been broker tested. In many cases, it has been court tested. The attorneys that are very smart at Texas Realtors and the brokers that do this are longtime brokers that do this for a living. So they're very, 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 very good forms. I would highly recommend you use them. And like I said, there's over 50 of them, so almost everything you can think of is covered by one of these forms. TexasRealEstate.com. This is the Texas Realtors website that is for your use. If you do not have a profile set up there, please go into TexasRealEstate.com, get a profile set up, and it's got all your stuff in it. All your listings are there anyway, but your profile is not. So you need to set up your profile. But if you will go into specialties and property management, it's now called property management and leasing in most of the different pages on the website. We wanted to add that because there's a lot of stuff in there for leasing agents too. There is a lease video. It's one of the things on that page. It is a paragraph by paragraph explanation of the lease. Unfortunately, we have a very, very long lease, which covers a lot of stuff. So the 16-page lease, covered paragraph by paragraph, is a 25-minute video. So it's long. I get it. Most people don't like something more than a couple of minutes, but there's a lot of stuff in that video. And with so many people signing a lease through DocuSign that they don't read now, or digital ink, or whatever program you're using, you need to make sure that you get that done correctly and that you understand it as well as having the tenant understand it. So, and the landlord understand it. Texas Realtors has a member benefit for screening. It's called My Smart Move. So if you go to this website, you can set it up, or your landlord client can set it up, or your tenant can set it up. All of these are possible depending on who you're working with and how you want to do it. But this is a screening service that will do the credit, criminal, evictions, database type stuff. They do not do the calls for the landlord, previous landlords, and they don't do the employment stuff, but they do all the rest of it. So, and we'll talk more about screening in a minute. There is another video out there that is at texaspropertycode.org, which is actually a very good website if you want to look at the property code in a readable format. There are a lot of versions of the property code on the internet, and most of them are old copies of old faxes in third and fourth generation, and it's very hard to decipher. This company put this together on texaspropertycode.org. But the reason I'm sending you there is what's really good about this is that right on the front page, on the home page, is about a 10-minute video that talks about security devices. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too, because this is something different on a rental that you do not have to worry about on a sale. So this goes through what the types of locks that you have to put on, what you have to make sure the windows have, what you have to make sure about smoke alarms and stuff like that. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute, but that's the location. It's at texaspropertycode.org. Number 5, education and competency. Again, like I told you, nobody has classes before you get your license. They just don't exist. It's something that TREC has talked about and other companies have talked about, but they don't really pay attention to it because basically all the questions on the test right now are about sales. Excuse me. You can go to Texas Realtors. We have 2 classes that we give that are all CE. The first one is the Texas Residential Leasing Specialist. It's a 2-day class. It's actually 4 3-hour modules. So you end up with 12 hours of CE. And the only requirement is that you sit for the 2 days. Once you've done that, you earn the TRLS designation or certification. The second one is a Tier 2, which is the Texas Residential Property Manager. That one's a little more complicated. It is 3 days. It is 6 3-hour courses, so 18 hours. Once you've done that, you have to pay a small fee and fill out an application at Texas Realtors, and you have to prove some property management experience. You cannot earn the designation until you get the experience, and right now it's 200 unit years, which is how many units you manage per year based on how many years you've done it. So if you have 50 properties that you manage, it would take you 4 years to get it, because you have to have a total of 200 unit years. If you manage 500 units, you still have to have 2 years because it requires a minimum of 2 years. Now, on that one, people always ask, well, I can't get it yet, so why do I take it? Take the education. It does not expire. Do the education now so you know what you're doing for the next couple of years before you get the designation. But it's a very, very good course. Competency, NAR Code of Ethics. Article 11, it talks about competency. It talks about market knowledge. It means you need to know what you're doing. I have a broker's license. I've had it since 1980. I am a residential guy. I moved my office last year. Guess what I did? I hired a commercial broker to do that for me. I don't do commercial, so don't go out there and do stuff you're not competent in doing. TREC absolutely has competency and market knowledge obligations. They are working right now as we speak on changing some things to make competency and market knowledge more applicable. Too many folks are running around doing things that they're not competent in doing. And so TREC is looking at changing some things to make sure that you do that, whether it's farm and ranch, which I would have no idea how to handle, residential, commercial, whatever part of the industry you're in, you need to make sure that you go out and take care of these types of things. Learn, mentor, get somebody in your office. If you've never leased a property before, go find somebody in your office that has and hang out with them. Gain knowledge from them. Follow them around. A lot of brokerages have a heavy-duty training department. They have a mentoring department and procedures in their office. These are phenomenal to get you to learn how to do whatever it is that you want to do. Don't just go out there and tell your client, sure, I can handle that, because that's how you're going to get in trouble. So watch out for that. Number 6, know the specific leasing laws. There are a lot of differences between sales and leasing, and some things that a lot of people are not aware of. Number 1, tenant selection criteria. This is a form that you have to have. It is required in the state of Texas because we used to have what we used to call app mills. They would go out and they would collect application fees, and they would never approve anybody for anything. So they were just making money off application fees. So the state passed a law back in 2007 that said that you had to tell the tenant what you're going to check. So this form exists on texasrealestate.com. It is not in zip forms because we made it as a Word document so that you can change it. And this is going to ask questions. So you need to sit down with your landlord. Those of you that are doing the listing, sit down with your landlord and discuss what they're going to check. How much do they want in income for this lease? How much do they want in rental history? Do they care about a particular credit score or what would show up on their credit or not? What do they care about on criminal background? How many occupants do you want in the property? These types of things. So this form will allow you to do that. And I'll show you in a little bit where that form is, where that form's located. Credit reports. Probably the biggest misunderstood thing in what happens in leasing. And unfortunately, it's the more seasoned agents that are the biggest violators. It is illegal to be faxing, emailing, copying, and sending credit reports from A to Z. I see a lot of listings where the listing agent says, submit credit report with application. While that statement isn't necessarily illegal, what the agents do with that is typically illegal. So the typical scenario is the agent goes someplace and pulls a credit report. I know a lot of agents that pull credit reports before they start showing people property. There is nothing wrong with that as long as the tenant agrees to it. The problem is that credit report now belongs to you. That does not give you the right to give it to anybody else. So what happens is they see this listing and they go, okay, well, I've got the credit report, and we'll fill out the app, and then I'll send it to the listing agent, who then turns around and sends it to the landlord. So now you've committed 2 federal crimes. Please quit sending credit reports around. In fact, I'm going to tell you in a minute, get out of screening altogether. But stop sending the credit reports. If you want to send the credit report to that landlord, you have the tenant run it, and then get the landlord's email or the landlord's address, contact information, however you're going to get it to them, and then the tenant send it straight to the landlord, bypassing you, bypassing their agent, bypassing the listing agent. You need to get the agents out of that. It is illegal to be running around throwing credit reports around on the internet. So please, please, please get out of that. Employment history. You have the right to know what type of employment the tenant's got. So you have something that you have to check. You don't necessarily check this when you're doing a sale. You don't really care. That's the mortgage company's job. In this scenario, it's going to be somebody else's job. Same with rental history. How do you get the rental history? How do you find out if this is going to make a good tenant or not? Criminal background. What can you do on the criminal background? Can you go in and check on their background? With the Supreme Court talking about different discrimination laws and disparate impact across the country, criminal background has become a hot button on how much you can check. You're not supposed to be looking at arrests. Arrests don't really matter. That person's not guilty of anything yet. What you need to look at is their actual convictions. What type of convictions? How long ago? There are some states that have already passed laws that says you can't even look at their criminal background until you've accepted them, and then their acceptance is contingent on looking at the criminal background. Because just by the fact that somebody's had an arrest versus another application where they haven't had anything, some people are saying, well, that's discrimination because you're automatically going to turn that person down because they had an arrest somewhere. So the feds are taking a lot of serious look at criminal backgrounds. Besides, if somebody got arrested 20 years ago for smoking a doobie and they've been fined for the last 20 years, do you really want to not rent them the house? That is not somebody that's going to tear your house up. They might order a lot of Cheetos, but other than that, you're fine. Occupancy standards. What's your occupancy standard? Does anybody know what the law is? We have a law in the state of Texas. It is against occupancy standards to put more than 3 per bedroom in a house in the state of Texas. Now, federally, HUD has given different occupancy standards over the years, but typically a safe harbor for occupancy standards is 2 per bedroom or 2 per bedroom plus 1. There are some variations on this depending if you have an efficiency apartment and square footage and things like that. But as a general rule, you can normally say 2 per bedroom or 2 per bedroom plus 1. And the plus 1 is where there have been instances where a couple will rent a 1-bedroom apartment and then they will have a baby and the property manager kicks them out because now they have said a 2 per bedroom. And so when they have a kid, they kick them out, and that usually ends up becoming a federal issue for discrimination against familial status. So be careful of that one. That's why I think the 2 per bedroom or the 2 per bedroom, or 2 per bedroom plus 1 is a easier standard to live with. But again, in the state of Texas, you cannot have more than 3. That's a violation of state code at that point. Adverse action notice. This used to be called a termination notice. It is a form. It is in zip forms. But if you do a electronic screening, or whoever does electronic screening, this form is usually provided to you. So you don't have to use the one at Texas Realtors, but you can if you want to. This means that if you turn down a tenant or if you counter a tenant, then you owe them this form. This form gives them the right to go and get a free copy of their credit report that will also show where you got the credit report and where you got the credit score. The reason, here's a typical scenario. I'm going to require 650 credit score on this property. I'm not going to let anybody in that doesn't have a 650. So the tenant comes in and you run their credit and they come up with a 642. So you say, okay, you're close. I'll let you come in if you pay an extra deposit. Well, by paying an extra deposit or requiring an extra deposit, you have in effect turned down their application and offered another one in its place. So you now owe them this adverse action notice. So don't forget that. Again, if you use My Smart Move, they're going to provide you the notice. So when you turn down somebody, you can take care of that. Red flag rules. You have a duty now to take care of the property, of the tenant's privacy information. When you get an application from somebody, you have a federal duty to protect that. If you don't, you subject yourself to a huge federal issue. You've seen all of the hacking that has taken place on different credit cards and things like that, and what those companies have to go through to make that right. You have the same obligation as a real estate agent. If you get this information, you have to protect it. Habitability issues, not applicable in sales. You can buy a house any old way you want it. You cannot rent one that's not habitable. You cannot say the gas stove only leaks a little bit, don't pay attention to it. You cannot say, just don't go in that third bedroom. The black mold on the walls is okay. I'm renting you the 2-bedroom price. I'm not going to rent you that 3rd bedroom. You can't do that. The house has to be habitable. Everything that's in it that's supposed to work is supposed to work. Door security. This is, again, what we were talking about earlier. You have to have a keyless deadbolt on all the major entrances and exits from the property. It's a 3rd deadbolt, or a 2nd deadbolt in some cases, that is actually put into the door that is not required. Builders won't do it. Sales don't care. This is a tenant rental property law in the state of Texas. Window security. Have to have openable windows. You can't go and rent something in the Heights that's 150 years old and have 45 coats of paint on it and the windows never open. If you have a window in the room, it's supposed to open, and it's supposed to have some type of lock on it. Smoke alarms, you're supposed to have, sorry about that. Smoke alarms, you're supposed to have smoke alarms, and they have to be inside every bedroom. They have to be outside of the bedroom. If one or more bedrooms share a hallway, you can just have one in that hallway, and then you have to have at least one on every floor. So a typical 3-bedroom house is going to have a minimum of 4 smoke alarms in it, 3 in the bedrooms and 1 in the hallway. Fire extinguishers. Do you have fire extinguishers in the property? Some insurance gives you a break if you do. However, if you do have a fire extinguisher in a rental home, you have an obligation once a year to have it checked. So if you're going to put a fire extinguisher in a rental home from the landlord side, make sure that it gets checked on a routine basis. Rental registration. Is your property subject to rental registration? Various cities and municipalities around the state require a rental registration process for anybody that wants to rent their house out. I know in Houston we have rental registration in Sugar Land. We have it in Missouri City. We have it in Bel Air. And I'm not sure of any other cities that we have in Houston that has it, but it's those I know we have, and you must register your rental. And if you don't, there's fines, and sometimes they won't turn on the utilities until you register it and that type of thing. So make sure whether or not there's rental registration for the property that you're going to be renting. Repairs. Who pays for repairs? There are specific repairs in the Texas Property Code that the tenant is not allowed to pay for. There are other repairs that the tenant is responsible for paying for. There are repairs that are gray areas. So discuss up front with the landlord what they're going to repair and what they're not going to repair. Tenant reps, same thing. Know this stuff. Figure out. Security deposits. Who holds them? Where are they? How much? Pets and assistance animals. Probably the #1 question I get asked every time we talk about something. What's going on with assistance animals? Pets. Is your owner going to allow pets? Even if your owner does not allow pets, they must allow a valid assistance animals. And I say valid because there's a lot of fraud on that side. So be aware of that you have the right to check. I've heard people say, well, you can't ask. If they have an assistance animal, you have to take it. Not true. You have the right to validate whatever documentation they give you. You also have the right to say, no, I'm not going to take a pet. But if a valid assistance animals comes, the landlord has no choice. There's a new form that Texas Realtors put out last session, and it is information about assistance animals. It is a phenomenal form, 3-page form. I recommend that if you sign a lease listing agreement, that you attach that as one of the addendum on your agreement. If you sign a property management agreement, that is also on the addenda list. I also recommend that you use that form there. That notifies the owner that you can say no pets, which I also don't advise, but you can say no pets. But if you do, make sure that you have the right to, that you make them aware of that there could be an assistance animal situation and they have to deal with that differently. Have these discussions up front. Don't surprise somebody later. Number 7, do you want to pick your landlord up front? Some of you, I put a question mark behind this one because some of you don't want to, aren't going to do this, but some people might. Depends on what this is more for the tenant reps. This is, have this discussion up front. Are you going to look for a professional property manager versus an individual landlord? If you do they advertise as a professional property manager? Do they have a website? That type of thing. Are they licensed? There are companies out there that don't have licenses that are doing different things because they for the particular thing that they do, they don't have to have a license. Other parts of the business, you have to have a license. So find out whether, go look it up at TREC, see if there's a license in that office or if they do everything outside. There are some companies that don't have a license in the office because they sub out their bookkeeping, they sub out their leasing to other companies. So look at that. Who are the payments made to? You paying the landlord or are you paying a property manager? Some people care. Online payments or online maintenance, do you have that ability, or does everything have to be written in a letter or a fax or a form that you have to fill out and submit to the landlord? Can you do this online? A lot of people like professional property managers because all of this stuff is online and easy. Your tenant selection criteria, did they give you one? That's important. You really want to know. Most managers that I know and most agents that do this a lot, they just put the tenant selection criteria on the agent docs inside their MLS listing so the tenant has it way up front and they know exactly what they're going to check. Now, here's some of the downsides to using a property manager. We are more formal. If you want to be less formal, maybe going with an individual landlord is easier for you. We are going to be more formal because we have to be consistent. We have less ability to customize the lease. I cannot imagine the nightmare of me having hundreds of leases and every one of them have different terms on it. It would drive us crazy. So we can't do that. You are going to have to pay the rent on the date that we take the rent. If you want to pay the rent on another day of the month, you're probably better off going with a landlord that can do that easier. Most PMs will only rent to people. We won't rent to a company. Companies replace the tenants at will, and that's not a good thing for us. We don't like that. So again, you might have to go to an individual landlord instead of going to a property manager because you want somebody that can handle that easier. And a company can be a co-tenant or a co-signer and can actually pay the rent. I don't really have a problem with that as long as they don't move a whole bunch of bodies in and out of that house that we're not aware of who goes in there. Please use the tenant selection criteria. This is number 8. It is the law. You need to do this. Please use one. It is not in zip forms. Here's where it is. You go to texasrealestate.com, legal, resources, and manuals, and it's about 2/3 of the way down the list. And it is a Word document, so you and your landlord have the ability to alter it any way you want. It does not, we wrote this a long time ago, we haven't updated it, even though the form date says 2014. It wasn't. We were going to look at it in 2014, but we didn't, and somehow the date got changed. So I would add an occupancy standard on it, just as a note. I would also add a signature line. It is not required that the tenant sign it, but I think it's good practice because then you avoid the he said, she said issue. And so the tenant signs it and you've got it, and you got in your evidence that you did it. Again, discuss it up front. Remember fair housing. You cannot discriminate. Make sure that your owner is aware of that, and that you follow the fair housing rules. A lot of that is now happening on the criminal background type stuff. Be consistent. Most property managers have one. Our owners agree that we're going to use the one that we came up with years ago, and that's the occupancy, and that's the tenant selection criteria that we're going to do all the time. Individual landlords working for with individual agents can do whatever they want. That's not necessarily a requirement, but for property managers, absolutely, we want to be consistent. Biggest thing is do not make exceptions. Once you've settled on one, make sure that that's what you do. Do not go around making, oh, well, I got this nice letter from this person and I think they're so cool, and so we're just going to make an exception and do this. That's how you end up in a fair housing complaint. Don't do that kind of stuff. So stick to your rules. Whatever is in your tenant selection criteria, that's what you do. Do not change that. Again, for your tenant reps, present your best application. You want to make sure that you are helping your tenant the best way you can for them to get their application accepted. Everybody 18 and over fill out an application. It is it's the first line on the application that Texas Realtors puts out. It is bolded. It is highlighted. This is what everybody 18 and over fill out one. We're not interested in the job history of your 18-year-old senior in high school. We want to know if he's got a criminal record or if it's on the sex database. That's what we're looking for. We're not, in fact, most companies don't even charge the same amount for the kids, but they are an adult, and so you need to be consistent and get an application on everybody. Fill it out completely. Don't leave a bunch of blanks in it. If you leave a bunch of blanks, you can't verify it. And so the landlords need to have everything in there. I know agents that if the application comes in and half of it's blank, they just chunk it and say you're rejected until you fill it out. A lot of property managers have online applications now, so for us it's easy. If you don't fill it out, we don't even get it. So you have to fill it out completely. Fill in the agent's contact information. This one is one I put an asterisk next to this one because this one is amazing. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen an application presented to us over the years when we were using paper that the agent's information was blank. Hint, people, y'all gave it to the tenant to fill it out. Put your name and your contact information on there. The tenant, no offense, isn't going to do that. So you need to make sure they do that. Even in online, we require them to put an agent's name and a phone number or an email or something in there so we know who we can talk to. It is amazing how many of those you get, and you know an agent gave it to them because when you print it out from zip forms, it's got your name at the bottom of it, and people still don't put it out there. So put it in there before you give it to them. Add the tenant's contact information. Sometimes you need more. This person may have flown in from Minnesota to look at houses for the weekend. Where are they staying? How do you get a hold of them? How can you find them? Most people have a cell phone now, so that's the typical. But again, where are they? When are they going to be available? Make sure everybody knows how to find somebody. On an application, just to be aware, unlike a sale that goes forever, once you make an offer, that offer is open until somebody kills it. On a lease application, state law says if it's not accepted within 7 days, it's automatically rejected. So time is absolutely of the essence in a lease application. You've got things to work out. You've got 7 days to do it. Tenant signs page 3 and page 4. If you're using the Texas Realtors application, it is a 4-page document. The tenant signature is on page 3. Page 4 is an authorization form where you can send to a landlord or send to an employer that says, I have the right to get this information. and the tenant also signs that page to give the employer or the landlord the right to release information. But that's an authorization form. The actual application signature line is on page 3. So if you receive a emailed or a faxed application for you agents that are handling landlords, and it's written on that form, make sure they sign both page 3 and page 4. Tenant reps, attach your documents, pay stubs, employer offer letter, visa, photo ID, bank statements, whatever it's going to take to get your person accepted. Most of us have instructions on our online apps, but that doesn't take the case on everything. You've got, you know, if you're self-employed, I need tax returns. I've got to be able to prove how much you make. I got to know that you can pay the rent. Pay stubs are great. If you're coming in from overseas and Exxon hired you and they want you to come in and you've got that employer offer letter, send us a copy. We're not going to find much on our background, but we've got a letter from Exxon saying that they have done the vetting for you. And if Exxon does the vetting, most managers I know figure out that that's fairly good enough. So have that offer letter in there. We will call them to make sure it's a valid offer letter and not fraud, but have that letter in there. Photo ID is controversial. Some people say, I don't want to give them a photo ID. They might discriminate based on what they see. Sooner or later, you have to. Again, red flag rule. I can't turn over keys to a tenant after I have run a background check on that tenant without knowing that's the person I actually checked. Sooner or later in the transaction, you're going to have to get a photo ID from that tenant so that you know that whoever you ran the background check on was the person you actually ran the background check on. So sooner or later in the process, you got to get it, but it's easier if you can just get it up front. Bank statements, if you need that, if you're trying to verify income and stuff like that, it's good. Tenant reps, review this stuff before you just forward it to the listing agent. It is amazing how many agents showing tenants go, well, I showed it, that's it, just send me my check, I'm done. That is not the case. You have a duty to be represented or to represent your tenant until the transaction is complete. I have a duty as representing a listing on the listing side or the management side. I can't talk to that tenant until they're my tenant. I am supposed to work with you. I am supposed to talk to you and get your stuff done. So, you know, I got my timer. Hey, I'm doing pretty good. I'm only about a minute behind. So review this stuff. Make sure you're doing what you have to do to get it to the listing agent. Make sure everything is in place that needs to be. If you don't, then we're going to start calling you. And if we can't find you, guess who is going to call me? That tenant's going to call me within 3 hours going, okay, how do I stand? Did I get it? What's going on? I got to move. What's going? And I go, ma'am, I can't talk to you. I need to talk to your agent and I can't find them. So you need to be able to be available to negotiate and complete this transaction. There are a lot of counters. There are a lot of things that have to be done up front in many cases. And again, I work for a property management company, but I know a lot of individual landlords that they're going to ask for the moon. So you better be prepared for it and figure out what's going on. So be available. You have a job to do until that lease is signed. Once that lease is signed, your job terminates. But until that lease is signed, you've got to go out there and be available. And then number 10, stay out of screening. It is not your job. If you will sit down and read your listing agreement, there is no authority and no responsibility for you to do any tenant screening. But I know we're real estate people. We're helpful. We want to make everybody happy. So yes, we'll do that for our landlord. It is not your job. It is the landlord's job. The only thing this can do is give you liability. Please, please, please stay out of it. Your other choice, the landlord does the screening. That is their job. It is not your job. Property managers, different. We do it all. But for you guys doing, which is the vast majority of the leases, are individual listing agents renting individual homes. Landlord does the screening. Now, how can they do that? The easiest way is they use a third-party screener. My Smart Move is a Texas Realtors member benefit. You can do that. You can also go, there's a new one out there that is based off of a screening company that property managers use called TREC. They have come up with a new one, a subsidiary to that, that's called Tenant Screening for Landlords.com. It's similar, it works similarly to the way that My Smart Move works, except that they do the landlord verifications, the rental history verifications, and the employment screening. If you have an issue with pets, there is another company called PetScreening.com. Unfortunately, they can't work with individual landlords. They work with property managers. But so if you do property management, I would absolutely have whoever does your screening tie PetScreening.com into it. They will check whether or not the tenant has pets. They will validate the pets, and they will also validate emotional support animals. So it's a phenomenal trifecta for taking care of pets and emotional support and those types of things. So if there's anything like that you can use, those things are great. So that's really the top 10. Now we're going to move into, do we have any questions? I wanted to leave a little time for questions. I'm going to let my associate over here drive, since she gets this better than I do. So, okay, let's see what kind of questions we have. Number one, what if the landlord doesn't want to lease to a tenant to another location they own? I'm not sure I understand that. So I'm assuming that you're saying the landlord has them in one location and they have another house and the tenant's making an application on another house that landlord has? I'm not sure. Can you clarify that question a little bit? She just said yes. Okay. Okay. So yeah, no, each house can be done separately. So if you've got a tenant that lives in one of your properties now and they want to go to another one of your properties, that property might have a different set of criteria or a different income requirement. There's no automatic that once they move into one of my houses, I have to move them into other houses that we have. If they're great tenants, absolutely. But if they, if they paid rent late every time that they've paid in the last 2 years, you may not want to rent to them again. So there's no legal requirement that I am aware of that says that once you rent to them in one house, you must rent to them in another house. You need to have, I think you need to have a valid explanation why not, but I don't think you can do that. So that's fine. If the landlord doesn't want to lease to them, there is no requirement in Texas that you lease to a tenant forever. So once the lease is up, you can also, for no reason whatsoever, you can send the tenant a notice to vacate at the end of their lease term. So if you've got a tenant that you don't like, that you don't want to keep, there is no requirement that you keep them. Some other states are starting to do this, but we have not done that in Texas. So once the lease is up, you have the right to say, I'm done. Have a nice life, move. So, and then you hope they actually move, because if they don't, then you have to evict them, and that's a pain. But hopefully they will move. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any. Oh, okay, I know I'm not that good. So you guys, so yeah, there is a question mark that you can have, that you can set up to ask questions. Okay, we just got, it's at the very top of your screen. There's just a blue question mark over on the top right, and you can type in a question. Okay, here's one. Sex database. How do you find out if the sex offender is a 1 to 10? Oh, slow down. Okay, now you guys found the box. Okay, click on that one. Okay, if you're the list, no, that one right there. Okay, sex database. How do you find out if the sex offender is a 1 to 10? That's a hard question. Most of the time, if you're using a professional screening service like My Smart Move, they're going to be able to give you that information. Is the way that I understand it works. I have been very lucky. I've only had a couple that have been on that database, but yeah, the sex database is a horrible database in my opinion, because you are putting high school sweethearts right next to pedophiles, and that database needs to be redone. And so I understand the question that if you can get somebody, you really want to be able to find somebody to see if they're the pedophile type or if they're the high school sweetheart type. So I believe that My Smart Move will do that. I know that AccuTREC, the company that we use as a property manager, they have that. But I don't. Other than that, if anybody has the answer, write it up here. I'll be more than happy to tell everybody. but I think that's most of the professional screening companies are going to have that. Okay, if you're the listing agent and a tenant responds to your listing advertising, you show them the property they want to apply. What is best practice? Buyer rep agreement or don't put one in place? I'd tell them up front they're a customer. It's your listing. They are not represented. If they want to go get represented, that's up to them. But you can't sign. If you're the listing agent, I don't think you should be signing. You already agreed to work for the owner. So I would tell the tenant that they're going to be a customer. Now, again, this could be a brokerage question. Some brokerages don't like that. Some brokerages would rather everybody be represented. That's the way I am in my office. We don't show our own properties. We use outside agents for everything because we want that tenant represented by themselves. So that's a decision that you have to make, but you can do it either way. But absolutely, you can just have them be a customer. So, but I would make a consistent determination in your office as to which way you want to handle it. Talk to your broker, and if you are the broker, have a meeting, and y'all figure out how you want to do it. But yeah, you can tell them, hey, you're a customer. I am not representing you. I am leasing you this property, and you do not have representation. At what point do you offer the tenant criteria? Absolutely up front. So I would put it, when you sign a listing with an owner, I would have that tenant selection criteria as part of that process, so that when you put the listing in MLS, you attach it to the agent documents so that the tenant knows right up front what they're going to be checking. Those of us that are property managers and use an online application, most of the ones that I am aware of, the online apps that I'm aware of, it's right up front. The tenant has to sign it before they can even be putting in information on the application. But we also attach it to our listings so that the tenant sees it up front so they know exactly what they're signing up for. But no, don't give it to them late. Give it to them right up front. Okay, if you're renting your investment property and you're the listing agent as well, do you need both IABS and a buyer-tenant agreement? Well, you can't have a buyer-tenant rep because you are the owner. So how would you represent the buyer if you're already the owner? I don't know that you could do that. There's an issue there with agents renting their own properties inside of a brokerage. Talk to your broker when you're doing that. Sex offender for peeing outside and a child saw versus true pedophile. I know that is the problem. That is the biggest problem I see on the sex database. And so trying to find out the difference with that is kind of hard. Can you refuse to lease to a sex offender? Absolutely. They are not a protected class. If you want to use SI for children, can you accept it, or can you have there is no requirement that you accept vouchers of any kind. Section 8 is a voluntary program. It is not mandatory. I know some landlords that love it. I know some landlords that hate it. There is no requirement in the state of Texas that you use Section 8 as a valid source of income. Have that discussion with your owner up front. Again, it's a process. It's a method of doing business. There are rules and regulations and documents you have to sign if you're going to use some of these different voucher programs. There's more than just a Section 8. So there's some that kids and stuff, and that's fine. Some of them are okay. Some of them you need to look at. Again, discussion you need to have with your landlord up front if they want to do this. There are certain landlord requirements. A lot of times some of these programs will pay above market rent. So it's up to you as to what you can do. There is no, can you request a copy of their last inspection? You can request anything you want. I don't know if they've ever had it inspected. I mean, they may have owned that house for 20 years and there isn't one. There is no requirement to have a seller's disclosure on a lease, on a residential lease. So there's no absolute have to have it. Make darn sure that you get a move-in inventory form and that you fill that out if you're representing a tenant. I can't believe how many tenants don't fill out a move-in inventory. And we actually tell our tenants, if you don't fill it out, we consider the house to be perfect, even though we walk through it the day before you move in and we know exactly what it looks like. Tell the tenants to fill in their move-in inventory. We hand them to them. I can't believe how many don't get it back. What if an applicant refuses to sign the IABS? There is no requirement that the tenant sign the IABS. There's a signature line down there for them to sign. It's easy if they do. Some of them don't, and you just, what I would do if I get somebody that refuses to sign it, I would just put a note on there, presented to the tenant on this date at this time, they refuse to sign it, and just keep a copy in your file. No, when I say housing, what is this? No, when I say housing, I mean Section 8. Yeah, you do not have to accept Section 8. Can you request a lead test? I guess you can. I don't know that the landlord's going to approve it. It is required on any home built before 1978 that you have a lead disclosure that you can present, but that doesn't mean the landlord necessarily has any reports. Can I ask a person who's on Section 8 for a copy of their last inspection? Ooh, I like that. I like that question. I would assume you can. They're on a voucher program. They have to follow specific laws. So most of that inspection is going to be based on the landlord issues, but yeah, I don't know why I don't know that there's a law against it. That's mine. On a lease listing, do we have to disclose that the house has flooded to the applicant? Absolutely. There were three bills that were filed in the last legislative session on people trying to have a flood disclosure placed on rental property. All three bills had horrible flaws, and so Texas Realtors did not support any of them, and subsequently they all failed. I don't necessarily have a problem with it if you can set it up right, and what they were trying to set up wasn't wrong. But just like any other disclosure, if you do not disclose, the neighbors will. So I am always big on saying, yes, this flooded, yes, this flooded, yes, this flooded, yes, this had this in it, yes, this had that in it. It is always better to disclose up front, because if you don't, the neighbors will absolutely do that. Does the landlord listing agent must provide the inventory form? I say yes, but I am not an attorney, and I say yes because I think it's the right thing to do. However, listing tenant reps, guess what? It's a form in zip forms. You have the ability to print it out and give it to your tenant just as much as the listing agent has the ability to print it out and give it to the tenant. So my vote is agents make sure that tenant, because guess what? When something goes bad, you're going to get the phone call. So if you can get one, which you can print it out as zip forms. It's just a blank form. Give it to that tenant, tell them to sign it, and tell them to send it in. If the landlord won't give him one, then I would have them send it to you as well as them, and send it to the listing agent, and make sure everybody's got a copy. So that's the best way. Okay, if you ask for extra deposit, what must we do again? Basically, if you ask for extra deposit, you need to use the adverse action notice, because you have countered what their original offer was based on something that they didn't fulfill. And so once you have a counter situation, then you have to give them the adverse action notice. Again, that form comes with the screening. So if you're doing a professional screening company, then you're going to already have the form. But if you don't use a professional screening company and you pull the credit some other way, or it's provided to you, then you can use the Texas Realtors form adverse action notice. Then that means, yes, you're giving them a rejection letter at the same time you're signing a lease with them. And that's kind of weird, but that's just the way it works. So if you can do it. Can the landlord require tenant to have renter's insurance? Yes, you can. Texas Realtors didn't want to put it on the lease because Texas Realtors' job is to protect the agent. And if we had put it on the lease, and we made recommendations to the owners that you absolutely have to do it, then that sometimes can put the agent in the middle liability-wise, and we didn't want to do that. But absolutely, a landlord can require renter's insurance. There are some property managers that use certain software programs that they have that the tenant can do online payments and online maintenance and stuff like that. And some of those systems are built into it where the tenant automatically gets renter's insurance from that company, and they may pay a small fee monthly for that as part of a benefits package. But there's various ways to do it, but absolutely a landlord can do it. Yes, you will. Everybody that's attending will get a copy of the presentation in a couple of days. Emotional support animals are tough. That is a whole class. I'm going to recommend that you go to petscreening.com and look through their materials. We will do this again sometime soon, and that's probably going to be the biggest list of, or the biggest request that we do. So we'll try to do that again. Let's see, last question, and then we're going to have to break it off. In regards to lead test, client's son is allergic to lead, and their current apartment was built 2014 and had lead in it. That's weird. Can they request to have a test done on the house they're interested in renting? They can request it, but that doesn't mean the landlord has to pay for it. So two different issues. The tenant, you have a specific issue with your son, with the client's son, so maybe it would behoove them to pay for that test. But you can always request anything. It's an application is an offer. So you can say, hey, I've got a son that's allergic, and I'd like to get a lead test done on this house. And I know some companies that they just put a lead disclosure on every single listing if the house even was built last year. It's interesting that you have lead built in something in 2014, but because that's a long time after the rules went in. But that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So, okay, y'all, thank you very much. How do we get to the next slide? You will get a copy of this presentation, but the last slide is my contact information. I am not giving you my cell phone. I'm giving you my office phone. Because of the way the do not call list works, if you're not a contact, I don't answer my cell phone anymore, and most property managers don't. But if you call my office and tell them you were a student and you have a question, they will put you through. If I'm not there, you'll go to my voicemail. I will call you back. But probably the easiest is send me an email. Just tell me you were in the presentation, you have a question. I have zero problem talking to students all the time. This is my staff will tell you this is what I love doing, is trying to educate people and make sure they do this right. Okay, so yeah, in a couple of days, you will get a copy of the report of the recording and a copy of the slides. So again, thank you very much, and y'all have a great day, and I hope you learned something today.